Guys, I thought I'd try to go over some of the things you want to look for on doing a two-door conversion. Not every car is the same, and there's a couple things you need to start with. The first, I would say, would be the wheelbase of the car. You can take any of your Tri-5s, the 58s, probably even the 59s and 60s. I would guess even on up until you hit about 68. I would have to look, and I'm talking about Chevrolets, that your wheelbase on the 4-door and the 2-door will be the same. To measure your wheelbase, you want to go between the center of the rear axle to the center of your front hub. The next thing you want to know is probably the length between your glass, your windshield, and your rear glass, and the height. And if those are same between your 2-door and 4-door, you've got a good candidate. The next thing you want to consider is how are you going to get from point A to point B, and that is how are we going to get our project completed with the least amount of effort. And without a doubt, the best way to do that is to get a pair of doors, the B-pillar and the inner structure out of a 2-door. And that is not always easily done, but I got lucky and found a smashed up 2-door. Sometimes if you get a donor car, you end up with a better car to build than you would convert one. All things to look at. Some of you guys followed the early videos here. I spent 4 days converting a post. Let me get that. Here is the original 4-door post, and here's the one that I chopped up. Then after 4 days, I got into how I was going to make that window work. Thinking about 4 more days on the other side, and still not being completely done. Plus getting the windows to work, I decided to back up and completely go another route. An important thing to consider is that even if you cut your doors and you have an extra pair of 4 doors and you cut them and you make your door longer, you're going to find it easier to complete if you make it the same length as a 2-door. And that will make it easier to get your glass. Flat glass can be cut. You can get double layered safety glass, and it's very easy to cut for glass cutters. Tempered glass is not easy to cut. And if you have to have custom made, it can get really expensive. So in this case, I've used 2-door doors, and I've used the 2-door rear section, ordered factory glass. It fits. That's one thing I don't have to fight with. If you can avoid all the engineering, you'll get your project done fast. The 58 has some very drastic differences from the Tri-5. How this entire section is put together is completely different. On the Tri-5s, the C-pillar slopes back like this. It's all open from here to here, which makes for a much bigger glass. Up and down mechanism of the glass completely different. The 55 to 57, I believe it turns down. This glass actually comes up at an angle. On the 4-door, it goes straight up and down. So all those mechanisms were different. The Impala roof is 2 inches shorter. This section of the roof is shorter between the windshield and the tail, and the trunk is longer. Trying to convert one of these to an Impala means basically you're going to need an Impala roof. You're going to need to cut out the center section here, and you're going to need a different trunk lid. It's going to be quite a chore. Let's get into let's say a 1968 Chevelle, for example. They look similar, but you'll notice right away the roof line is different. But the wheelbase is also 4 inches longer on the 4-door than it is on the 2-door. So in order to convert a Chevelle, you would have to shorten the frame and the roof. And then you'd have to replace the sail panel and the quarter panel area on the roof, and then you'd have to do all the sheet metal in between to make it right. These things need to be studied on a little bit up front before you tear into one. It can be done. It's just the amount of work that you're going to have to put into it to get it done. It may not be worth it. You make your door lengths and widths, or lengths longer or shorter, it's going to create a lot more work for you. Although it may be what you want, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's the amount of work it's going to take to get there. And anytime you move outside of what they've already produced, now you're engineering it yourself and you're on your own. And creating a mechanism for this back window section can be quite a job. And one important thing to do though is don't get locked into a single train of thought on something. When you start to see something's just not panning out like you think it should have when you started, don't be afraid to back up and just change direction. I saw that if I kept going with my posts and modifying them, that I could get there. And I already realized I would have to slope that window channel at the bottom and make that window go back, get away from the door lines. But the amount of time it was going to take to get there didn't justify not spending the money to get the more parts. And the more parts came out really good for me. And another important note is cover your glass up when you're welding. It melts. And you have lots of little tiny holes in your glass. Whenever you're taking cars apart, and don't tear, save everything. You go out and you find you a donor car and they let you cut out this rear section, you want to save every screw. You want to save all these window channels and not tear off the little tabs that hold them on. All this stuff on a 4-door is attached to the door. It's wrapped onto it. On the 2-door, this stuff unscrews and just slides off. But it comes off much easier than it would on a 4-door. But when you go out there and you start prying and trying to pop it off, you're going to bend it really badly. Let's look at some other things you can have trouble with. Probably the best way I know to do this is get this panel off your back door. If you don't have a good back door, go get one, because 4-door doors are fairly cheap. Run your grinder against the edges of the door where it's folded over and it'll cut loose. There are always going to be, probably in the area where the trim is at, there's going to be a spot weld on the inside where it folds over. I use a 1/2-inch drill bit and drill it and then cuts it loose. When you put it on, you need to think about when that door was a door, there was a gap all the way around it. So it kind of wants to be there. What you've got to do is line up your top, make sure you get that as even as you can on your post to here, so that your belt line at the window will be straight going forward and back. You should have a small gap here. Down here it's going to want to overlap. You can push it back this way and leave a bigger gap, which is going to be harder to weld, or you can simply cut that edge and let it slide back a little bit. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. Anything else is going to cause you more trouble. On the 58, you have a lot of contours. You've got this here, you've got this here. The top edge needs to line up, and this all needs to come down straight. When you're moving all this around, you need to watch that front, because if you get it tight at the top, that's going to really exaggerate how high this pops up. It's going to come way up. A 1/16 of an inch here could be 1/2 inch down there. So really watch what you're doing, because once you weld it on, you don't want to have to cut it back off. What do you think? You know how to tell it? You tell the story then. You tell about it. You can do it better than me. Another thing that makes it easier is if your front clip, your doors, are already set where they should be. And in my case, it wasn't perfect. You've got to watch these gaps up here, because when you close that door, if you don't have any room to move your door anymore and this is tight, you're not going to get that out of there. You need to consider also having a rubber seal around that. It's going to make the door even tighter. So you want to make sure you've got a decent gap around these doors. This one I haven't got welded completely yet, and it's a little tight, so I'm going to cut that a little bit wider. I'm going to push this back and weld it together to give myself a little more door gap. And I may even cut the top loose and pull it back in. But now that I've learned my lesson, I can just tell you about it. There's always more to tell, more to learn. We're figuring this out as we go here, and I hope this helps some of you avoid some of the things I've run into. There's one more thing that can get you in trouble, and that is when you're welding. You'll see on this side as opposed to the other side, I've got one piece of metal going from here to here. On the other side, I filled in this area where the rot was, and then when I came in with the door, I had to fill in a little gap there, so I had a weld here on top of a weld, and another weld here. And then when I got back here, I had 1, 2, 3 pieces, and then the lower quarter back there. And the closer these panels get to each other, the more heat goes into that metal and the more warp you're going to get. There is no realistic way to get behind that with an inner quarter there to straighten it out. And straightening metal is no easy chore. If you've got a piece of metal out and you can beat on it and hammer and dolly it and then roll it, you can get it fairly straight. But when it's on a car like this, it is not as easy as they make it seem. So the important thing to note here is less is by far more better. One big solid panel, and I've got a good solid edge here because that's wrapped around the pillar. On the front, I've got a solid edge because it's wrapped around that pillar. Those are good welding places. A lot of that heat can run off into those corners and bends, and it makes a good place to weld. When you get into the bottom and there's nothing there, you've got to be very careful and very patient. You really got to spread your welds out. I'm going to have to put a filler piece in there. The smaller that your filler piece is, the harder it's going to be to keep it straight. So I may be better off even cutting this back an inch or 2 inches and putting a wider piece in than I would be putting in a piece that's 3/8 inches wide across there, because I'm welding the top and bottom of that. That's introducing a lot of heat. And this rocker I still have to fold under, and that's why it's not welded yet, because I want to get it rolled under before I weld it. When you weld metal, it becomes brittle. And you know, when you're on an edge like this, you're going to get away with it. But when you're down here and then you've warped your metal and now you want to hammer on it, that brittle's going to show up and it's going to crack. And then you're going to weld again, and then there's going to be more heat. The important thing here is one big sheet of metal is a lot better than 3 or 4 smaller pieces welded together. You're going to have a lot of work ahead of you. I'm looking at later down the road getting a section of front quarter panel, you know, with the little forks on it for this. And it comes from back here. It goes up behind the trim where you'll never see the welds, and then right back down the front. And it'll go all the way down to the bottom. So that'll take care of everything here. But that's all for the future. For right now, I'm going to do the best job I can the way this is. But if you bought like I've seen on the 55s, they sell a panel that comes up and curves out like that, and then you've got patching to do down here, and then you've got a filler piece there, and then you've got some work here. It can get so far out of control that, like another friend of ours, he had back up and punt. You got to replace the whole quarter panel because there is so much work involved in trying to get that metal flat and no way to get to it from behind that it becomes a disaster for you. And once you put in 3 or 4 patches, and you know, then is not the time to come back and try to use your back door panel. You've already heated all this metal up around it and you've already made it fragile. It just makes the job tougher. So the key is less sheet metal, less welds, and you'll have better success. And by far I found that the best way to get these welds is right on the edge of that pillar. When I cut this pillar out, I left the front strip where the door folded over and was welded on at the factory. And then I brought my metal up to that and welded it to the edge of it. And it goes pretty good because that heat dissipates fairly well off into this other metal. And you've got that curve right there, so it tends not to want to warp. It will pull in. If you think about your welding with a wire welder, and you're heating that metal to a liquid, and then this wire is always pushing it. It's always pushing it. So you could lay out sheet metal on the floor and weld two edges together and hold it up, and you'll find that there's a nice curve all the way through the center that it creates a kind of a bed or a dish in the metal where you've welded, because that wire is pushing liquid metal all the time when you're welding it. Then you're gonna, you know, that's why you'll see on long welds, they're flattening that metal as they go. When they flatten it out and then they go do the next one, they have to flatten it out because that wire keeps pushing that liquid metal in, and then it creates a bed. But there is an advantage to that too. If you're doing body work and you're smoothing out your welds with filler, you would much rather there's a bed in there for that filler to go into than there is a high spot that you have to get rid of. Because now you're starting to hammer on high spots and you end up creating even more work. So a low spot where you've welded is much easier to fill. And on the edge of a door like this, as a general practice, you're gonna smooth that out with some filler anyways to make your gap just perfect. And that's a good place to weld, right there on the edge. If you're out here an inch, then you're creating waves in your metal out here, and you have more tendency to get warps back in here. If this gets hot enough, it can pull a warp back in this that you'll never get out. It creates a lot of tension in the metal. And we'll close all that up by saying I am not the guy to come to for welding lessons, because I could use a few myself. I've got to go back over a lot of this stuff. I've got some little holes to fill in. No, I'm not the guy. I'm out here with a $100 welder I got off eBay. And this is the second car I've gone through, so I've made my money on that welder. That's well worth the $100 to come out here and learn. Okay guys, hope some of that helps you. Makes your project just a little bit easier. We'll get this all wrapped up. And before I go, I would like to invite everybody to take a look at Saving Junk's conversion on a 61 Chevy. I'll leave a link to his page below. He's doing a few more interesting things, a little bit different. It's kind of cool. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.